Hello, I'm Michael Pachter. I'm a research analyst at Wedbush Securities, and I am very, very happy to be at the GamesBeat 2020 conference. And I'm doing a fireside chat with my good friend, Owen Mahoney, who is a man of a jack of all trades, but currently CEO of Nexon Corporation. And Owen, welcome to GamesBeat.
Thanks. Glad to be here. I wish we were all in the same place.
I think we are. I think you're just in the next room, aren't you? Although I don't remember that white couch, maybe. I think I had bunk beds next door, actually.
Yeah.
So Owen, can you just give us a minute or so just about Nexon? What is Nexon? What are you known for? What are you proudest of?
Sure. Well, Nexon is not well known in the West, but well known in the East, I would say. We are pioneers in the free-to-play online games business. We started in the mid-90s on PC. We came out with the first graphic MMORPG of all time. So long before World of Warcraft or any of those games in the genre, we came out with a game called Kingdom of the Winds, and that really bootstrapped us in the about 94, 95. Later, we created the first free-to-play game called Quiz Quiz in the early 2000s. And today we generate about $2.5 billion or so on the revenue line and generate about 35% operating profits. Our largest market is China. Our second largest market is Korea, where we are founded. We're listed on the Tokyo Stock Exchange since 2011. And our center of gravity has been and continues to be Korea, Seoul, Korea. But recently we've been building out our development capability around the world. We recently in 2019, we purchased a company called Embark Studios in Stockholm, Sweden. And we're very excited to be able to talk about them more later in the year and what they're working on. But our core business is about deep, immersive online games and virtual worlds. So traditionally that's online role-playing games. Sorry, my phone was ringing there. Online role-playing games and virtual worlds and first-person shooters, those sorts of things. And we continue to expand that area of our business.
And you said your core markets are China, South Korea. Can you just give us a broad distribution of revenue on geography?
Sure. It depends on the quarter. It fluctuates by the quarter, of course, because we have Lunar New Year, which is a little bit like the Christmas quarter would be in the US. So that would be Q1. But typically about 40 to 45% of our revenues come out of China, followed closely by Korea. Although Korea has been rising pretty rapidly recently. And then rest of world, which is in order, Japan, US, Europe, rest of world. We do a pretty big business in Southeast Asia as well.
Can we, without giving away any secrets, can we talk about the impact of the pandemic and stay at home and how that's impacted user behavior? What are you seeing in terms of user trends?
Yeah, we're in front of the quarter results. So about 3 or 4 weeks from now, we announce our earnings results for Q1. So I have to be a little careful about what we talk about. But I think we're experiencing the same thing that I've read other companies like us have been reading, which is a lot of people are staying at home. A lot of people are consuming a lot more online video games for all sorts of reasons. One, because we're all home more, but also I think we're looking for connection and ways to challenge together and communicate and cooperate together. So that's clearly impacting our business. I mean, we have a big PC cafe business as well. So that clearly is down because people are not collecting in PC cafes as they once were. But overall, I think our business, is minimally very resilient. Worst case, it's very resilient in times like this. We were started in the mid 1990s, as I said, and then soon after our founding, we got heavily tested, or our business got heavily tested by the financial crisis in Asia of 1998 and 1999. We were then tested again in 2008, and in each one of those cases, our business got stronger, not weaker. So, what's going on in the world is horrible for many, many industries, but knock on wood, I think the games business, and particularly online and particularly deep immersive worlds and highly connected online games are very minimally very robust and possibly quite anti-fragile, meaning they actually get better in times of stress like now.
Can you talk about the social construct in some of your top games? What exactly, what is the goal of the game? How do players play, single player versus play together? What type of alliance mechanics or group mechanics are there? And what keeps them coming back?
Yeah, well, our games are deeply immersive virtual worlds. So, and what that means is they're designed from the ground up to be online. There's, if you think about a lot of games are sort of 80% single player, and then they've got some sort of multiplayer aspect tacked on. We're probably exactly the opposite on average with our games. Our developers start with the online part, and they start with connecting people together and what's the online gameplay about. And then we may add on some areas where you can play by yourself for a while, particularly around the tutorial, sort of early tutorial and so on. So you learn the game mechanics. But take a game like Dungeon Fighter, which is one of the most popular games of all time. It came out originally in 2005. It, in terms of life-to-date revenue, we don't disclose the exact number, but I can tell you it's within the top 3 easily, based off of what we've read other companies like, or other games like Call of Duty and Grand Theft Auto have done. It's just very big in China. It's not well known in the West. But a game like that is an action role-playing game is the way to think about it. So you go in and you're playing against other players, you're playing with other players. Game like Maple Story, which is another very popular game of ours, popular in both Korea, China, as well as Southeast Asia. On the surface, it's a 2D side-scrolling, pixelated adventure that was created in originally 2003. Underneath the hood, it's a deeply immersive online role-playing game. And so it's got a very sophisticated economy. It's got tons of content, a lot of different ways to play. A lot of very heavy RPG game mechanics, online RPG game mechanics. So that's the way to think about our games. And of course, we have games like Kart Rider, which is a huge franchise. It's been played by nearly half the population of Korea. It's been played by half of the population of Taiwan. It's had 100 million more players play Kart Rider than have played Mario Kart, which is clearly the gold standard in the genre. We're going to be coming out with the next version of the game probably later this year. So we're very excited about that. But it's, again, we take the perspective that you really want to be playing this game online first and last. So it's free. It's going to, our next version is going to be multi-platform. So not just PC, but across consoles and other platforms. And it's built to be, we have sophisticated matchmaking tools built in it and so on. Matchmaking is a very big deal in that genre. So we focus on the online aspects of the game, sort of first and foremost.
So Dungeon Fighter, what's the maximum number of players that I can engage with them? Is it 1-on-1, 4-on-4, 300 on 300? Same with Maple Story and same with Kart Rider.
Yeah, well, it depends on the game, but it's going to be sharded for typically smaller groups in the direct action, but larger groups in the total virtual world. But you're going to have shards, so it gets split up. So it's not one world with millions of players, but the numbers that we're talking about are in the tens of millions of total players.
And how do I interact? Do I interact? Is everybody an opponent? Do I have teammates?
You've got alliance mates, clans, guilds, depending on the game. And you're going to have, friend and foe. You're going to have PvP. You're going to have PvE types of environments. So same types of a lot of the tropes that we started, in the early 2000s. Tropes is probably the wrong word, but a lot of the same sort of methodologies that we started in the early 2000s have been developed out in the West as well. So it would look familiar under the hood to a lot of people who are Western game players, particularly online.
And you mentioned free. Can you talk about the correlation between engagement and in-game spending And so, without revealing what delta you're seeing in engagement, I should presume that higher engagement equals higher spend. But can you kind of explain how that works?
Sure. So one way to think about free is I think the way that a lot of folks think about free is I'm gonna put up a paywall and I'm gonna monetize a lot, and I'm gonna look for the whales, and I'm gonna get the whales to come in. And when we think that's a mistake, and we think that's a mistake based off of our experience. So what we've done is focus on having a very broad base of players, and big spenders are not what we really search for. We look for a lot of people in the game, a lot of activity, and a lot of interaction within the virtual world. And then we look for, a reasonable to low amount of spend on any individual player. So less than 10%, roughly 10% of our players worldwide pay us something. And those players that do pay, monetize at a very reasonable rate, and there's not a massive disparity between sort of the rich and the poor, right? It's very much a middle layer. So when you look at our sort of monetization between the highest monetizers and the lowest monetizers, we're by design we try to get it in the middle. We try not to have these huge whales as much. Now, what that means is, in times like this where you're sort of being careful of every penny, you want to have that type. You want to have a broad base of monetization rather than having it be too high on any individual player.
Have you disclosed the number of active players you have, or do you disclose that regularly?
We haven't disclosed the active number, but it's in the tens of millions.
Okay, so tens of millions, meaning single-digit millions, spend money and they pay out $2.5 billion. So a couple $100 a player per year is kind of the number. Then it's not a crazy number.
It's gonna depend on what our partnerships and what our royalties are all about and those sorts of things. So it's not gonna be quite that simple math, but the idea is it's not a crazy number. Again, the whole idea of a whale is I actually think that came out of Las Vegas, right? Which is someone who runs into town and he's a high roller or she's a high roller, and then you really take care of them and you really want to focus on the whales. Problem is that makes your business kind of fragile. And if that whale leaves, then you're really in a tough position. So I don't think that's a very good way of going about it. And, we've sort of learned that over the years, or now over the decades, just by experience.
Then you mentioned that you were working on a new version of Cartwriter. You also mentioned your acquisition of a Swedish studio. That means that there's development going on, like new games coming. Can you talk about game development in the context of the pandemic and how you get games done working from home?
Well, that's a great question. I'm clearly, we're doing this from your home office, from my apartment. We're all working at home at Nexon. We're actually, as you and I are talking here, in Korea, we're working out of the office again. Korea has been sort of ahead of the curve a little bit in terms of the pandemic. But we've been on lockdown, depending on the region, for about 2.5 months now. So we've been dealing with this for a while. Obviously, a big part of our revenue comes from China. So we've been watching this since early January very, very closely. And we worked really hard to be able to do work from home. And the good news, and I think this is a big and misunderstood part of the games business versus other parts of the entertainment businesses, we actually can develop content from home. So we've got lots of live games. They've got millions of players simultaneously accessing, and we're running events. These are live worlds. So it's, the way to think about a live virtual world like MapleStory, it's kind of like Disneyland, right? Except it's a virtual Disneyland. It ends up having a lot of similar aspects of it, but we're, doing customer support, we're operating the games, we're doing events within the games, we're doing promotions, and we're updating the content constantly. So these are virtual worlds, but we can operate these surprisingly well without having to do it from an office. So that's about operating the game. And then in new game development, you've got some complexities because you have to be very careful about VPNs and security and those sorts of things. You've got, game developer artists, for example, who have tablets, and big screens and so on. But we've been able to weather through this, I think, quite well. One of the key things is our content production has not stopped at all. In fact, it's gone, in some cases, it's gone a little faster. Some of our employees will tell it. I was talking yesterday to one of our leaders, and he was saying, look, I think our productivity is going up now, just because people are able to focus and they don't have to deal with a commute and those sorts of things. But clearly, it's going to depend a lot on the individual. It's going to depend a lot on the team. It's always better to be working as a team, but the key point is production doesn't stop. I feel I feel for our colleagues in Hollywood whose production has completely stopped. I mean, I don't know what people are going to be doing 6 months to a year from now when the content coming out of Netflix is, as far as I can tell, all production of linear content has stopped. And that's definitely not true in the games business. And it's not true for us at all.
And I know I'm just asking for an opinion. I know you're not an economist, but can you talk about, how you see the looming recession? Obviously lots of joblessness and possibly persisting for the balance of the year or longer. How does that impact in-game spending? I mean, is this something that is, cut out first or cut out last, or how do you see the entertainment spend in the context of people losing their jobs?
Well, I'm, as you say, I'm not an expert on the larger economy. I have been shocked. I was in Japan until a week ago, and I've been watching. And I was in Korea right before they went into lockdown. I think we've all gotten a lesson on what we don't know in the economy, in science, and we're living in crazy times. And I think it's an important time to take stock of what we don't know. So it would be impossible for me to predict. But I think it's safe to say that we're not going to stop going to entertainment. We've seen this before in times of war and economic downturn. We still look to entertainment as a way to escape, to connect, to be told stories, to share. If I could think of one place in the entertainment business to be, online games would be the place. And in particular, free-to-play online games would be the place. And in particularly free-to-play games that don't rely on whales. So, by luck and happenstance, I feel like we in this industry are positioned as well as anybody could hope to be. But that's not to diminish, I think, the depth and the scariness of what this world is for all of us. So not to be a downer. I mean, the good news is we're in the games industry. All the people who are participating in this conference are very, very well positioned relative to the rest of the world right now.
Can you talk about the range of transactions in your games, just like least expensive to most expensive? I mean, can I buy something for as cheap as a penny? Can I spend $1,000? I mean, what is the range?
Well, it would be in that range. We sort of group and put together different items in different ways, but typically that's a few dollars for an item. We'll sometimes do season passes. We've been experimenting with that a lot, but it's typically in US dollar terms, it's a few dollars. And then we will sometimes package things together. We do have users who pay a lot. But we don't really focus on that part of the business. We typically focus on someone who's spending $10 to $30 a month. Right. So in that zip code. Got it. But it's interesting how it works. Someone might play a game for years on end without ever paying us anything. And then they'll buy something to trick out their character or to add a pet or something like that. And then typically they'll tend to buy a little bit more over time. So if you look at individual cohorts, they'll tend to spend a little bit more over time. And that's been a pattern that's continued through many years on many different games in different regions. Right.
And my experience is once you start spending, you learn how to spend. Get a little more used to it. Yeah, exactly. I asked you this last year, but I'd just like to get an update on your largest shareholder and your balance sheet and any plans for any kind of a corporate event. You updated me a year ago, but I'd like to hear an update this year.
Well, I think I updated you a year ago that I can't talk about that too much in terms of M&A. No, I mean, so since last year at this time, since we last talked, we have generated another $1 billion in cash. We used some of that to acquire or to make two major investments. We acquired we finished our acquisition of Embark Studios in Stockholm, Sweden. That's the group that's led by Patrick Soderlund, who he and his team created Battlefield franchise for EA. When I was at EA, I purchased DICE, which was the creator of Battlefield. We brought them in. Patrick ended up running their studios for several years. He ended up subsequently leaving in 2018, and we made an investment in the company that he started. And then we finished that acquisition last year. We also made an investment into a company called Wonder Holdings, which is a Korean company founded by a very talented leader named Min Her. And Min and his team originally created Dungeon and Fighter years back. And Dungeon Fighter came out in 2005. It has since generated as much revenue life to date as any game in the industry that we know of, save a couple. And worldwide, it's several $1 billion bigger life to date than Star Wars and several other the largest Hollywood franchises, if you take gross revenue to box office. So it's one of the biggest franchises of all time. He's got several other projects in the works that we're really interested in. So we bought a minority interest in his company. We did a roughly $300 million share buyback in the course of 2019, and we put the rest in our bank. We now have about $5 billion in the bank. That gives us a lot of strategic flexibility. We're not like an airline. We're not like a lot of companies. We didn't do massive buybacks. We certainly didn't borrow money in order to do buybacks. We've been very, very conservative with our balance sheet, because we never thought that, the world is always sunny. We want to live in a house that can work in any weather. We don't want to be in the weather prediction business. We certainly don't want to be in the economic prediction business. We want to have safety for our employees, for our business. We want to make sure we're living in a very solid house, in a very solid frame. So today we've got a lot of flexibility in case we were to do something strategic. So we're looking at a lot of stuff. Right now, we don't have any announcements to make. We'll see where it goes from here. I think, the Fed is clearly trying to inflate the markets. So I don't know what everybody's so excited about in the stock market, but it's clearly there's a disconnect between the stock market and the real economy. So we'll see where we go from here.
I personally am a huge Patrick Soderlund fan, so I understand why you would be, you find his company appealing. But can you talk strategically about a European acquisition? Because primarily, your development has been Asian, and your success has been Asian. What does this do for your company?
Well, as you say, our center of gravity for development is in Asia, and there's an aspect of games that's very much culturally oriented, of course. So you look at a game like MapleStory or Dungeon Fighter, and it looks very Asian. It looks like it was created in Korea, because it was, and that works well in China, and it works well in Southeast Asia and to some extent Japan, but it doesn't necessarily work well in the West. But the core concepts of an online virtual world that you are living in an alternate life. And that life has an economy, it's got politics, it's got adventure, it's got interaction and a sociology associated with it. That's universal. And I think this is the future of entertainment. What we have really wanted to do for some time is to work with a Western developer or Western developers who understand this core concept, who want to take the best of what we've learned in Asia and apply it in a way that really works in the West. And the team, Patrick and his team, have been through this for many years, since Battlefield, since the original Battlefield 1942 in the early 2000s. And they've learned a lot, and they've also learned what they don't know. And they are awesome. One of the great, great teams at making AAA content for the West. And Nexon has a lot of weaknesses, but it's got a massive strength, among some others. But its massive strength is the ability to make a game last and grow for a really long time. And if you look at the graph of what MapleStory has done, it's accelerating. And Dungeon Fighter has done phenomenally over the years. And these games have been going, they have their dips, they have their ups and downs, but they've been going up and to the right for many, many years. And again, it's a little bit like Disneyland, right? 60, 65 years into Disneyland, it's still getting bigger. So, so our concept with the MBAR team is to combine the best of what they do, which is AAA online content in the West, and combine that with what we do, which is to make a game last and grow for a really long time. And they felt that they had a lot to learn from Nexon, and we felt like we had a lot to learn from them. So it's sort of the yin and the yang of those two worlds. And that's the core concept of the acquisition, the partnership. And we could not be more thrilled with how it's going. I wish I could talk to you about it today. I can't talk to you about it today, but we'll be doing that later this year.
Can't wait. Okay, we have about 3 minutes left, so I'm going to ask you a 10-minute question, and you got to do it in 3 minutes.
Okay. Okay.
With the pandemic, I think that a lot of commentators are talking about how we're going to emerge from this, in the near term. Where do you see the world going? Like, what do you think life is after the pandemic? Is this impact on gaming transitory? Is it lasting? How do you see the world evolving in the next year or two?
Well, I read probably the same stuff that you do, Michael, and I don't think that we're looking at a V-shaped recovery. I mean, again, I'm not an economist. I mean, the world economy is stopped, dead in its tracks. And I don't think we're just going to flip it back on overnight. But I think one of the things that this has done, and so when we emerge, we're going to be emerging into a world that is changed significantly. I mean, we're doing this over Zoom. My family members are now doing, like everybody else's family members, they're doing cocktail hour and birthdays over Zoom. We're communicating with our family members. We're living in a virtual world in a lot of ways. And I think this is really opening up. I think this is going to take, in 1917, we entered the 20th century. And I think this is the event that takes us into the 21st century. And a lot is going to change about trade. A lot is going to change about how we look at health and healthcare. And a lot is going to change about how we look at entertainment. And I guess the short way I would think about it is we looked in the 20th century, we looked at entertainment, the center of gravity for the entertainment business being linear entertainment. We sit back on our couch, you, the entertainer, tell us a story. And in the games business, we've known that world has been changing rapidly. The games business is already much bigger than the linear entertainment business. It's growing at 3 times the rate. And oh, by the way, it's highly profitable, unlike linear entertainment. I mean, Netflix, you would know better than I, Michael, but I think Netflix burned, what, $5 billion in cash last year, somewhere in that zip code?
A little over 3, yeah.
Yeah, so we generated 1. Companies like EA and Activision generate a lot of cash. So we're bigger, we're growing faster, we're profitable. And as an entertainment form, it's just much more engaging to be leaning forward and to participating in the world, in a virtual world. I'm a firm believer that that's a highly important form of entertainment. Now with, I've got an iPhone 10 here, you can deliver an amazing, amazing game experience, a deep virtual world, a deep online role-playing game on an iPhone. And that means that instead of having a total addressable market of roughly 300 million game playable PCs around the world, we've now got a total addressable market of the low billions of mobile phones. So we're going by a total addressable market that's up by at least 10x. And so that world, we're now in the new world. And I think everybody's waking up to that right now, this week, this month, this quarter. And so we're going to be in a different world, a very, very different world in the next 5 years.
All right, I'm going to end it there. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you, GamesBeat, for having us. I'm Michael Pachter, signing off.